Malka, President and co-founder of Bioforum, a global data management-focused CRO. This is a very exciting time for our industry. COVID-19 has created many challenges regarding the way doctors and patients interact and how clinical trials should be performed. Now, there is good news. The good news is that the technologies to enable remote interaction and digital data transformation exist, and many organizations have been using them long before COVID-19 hit. However, challenges still exist. Organizations are dealing with limited headcount and resources, the pressure of SMBs to keep costs down, and at the same time, speed up time to market has become even more difficult those days. Developing clinical trial outsourcing partnerships that are based on trust, strategic thinking, and flexibility is more important today than ever before. We at Bioforum are working to raise the bar with all sponsors globally through the clinical trial process to FDA submission and across therapeutic areas. Our specialty is working with emerging biotechs and pharma companies and building a strong long-term relationship with them that grows as they do. We are very happy to be part of this important conversation with leaders who, like us, have been there. Thank you to our panelists for their insights on how to form partnerships that drive innovation and help accelerate the clinical development process. And of course, a special thanks to Pharma Voice for bringing us all together. Thank you.
Thank you, Amir, for that great intro. Hello, everyone. I'm Dan Limbach, producer of the Pharma Voice Webcast Network, and I'll be your facilitator for our panel entitled Developing Clinical Trial Outsourcing Strategies That Scale as Biotechs Do, sponsored by our friends at Bioforum, the Data Masters. We are very excited to have an esteemed group of panelists to discuss the strategies that small to mid-sized biotech and biopharma organizations can employ to ensure flexibility, their ability to scale, and increase the value of outsourcing partnerships over time. Let's get introduced to our panelists. First, we have Amir Malka, President and co-founder, Bioforum, the Data Masters, who we just heard from in the introduction. Since its formation in 1998, Amir has led the company to become a data-focused CRO committed to helping companies understand the value of their clinical data. He brings his extensive background in the life sciences industry, and in particular in clinical trials, to drive innovative clinical trial services. We also have Guy Goldberg, Chief Business Officer of RedHill Biopharma. RedHill is a specialty biopharmaceutical company primarily focused on gastrointestinal diseases. Guy has served in this role for the last 8 years. Before joining RedHill, Guy served as a Senior VP of Business Operations at Eagle Pharmaceuticals, a specialty injectable drug development company. And finally, we have Kanchan Relwani, VP and Head of Medical Affairs of Alkermes. Kanchan is a 2020 Pharma Voice 100 and a physician with a deep-seated commitment to improving patients' lives. Kanchan has helped grow the medical affairs organization and expanded the scope and impact of the function within the company. She has spent more than 12 years in the pharmaceutical industry, starting at a medical affairs agency before moving to biotech and quickly transitioning to leadership positions. What an amazing panel, don't you agree? For more information about our thought leaders, please go to pharmavoice100.com. But for now, stick around so you can hear the panel. This session is moderated by Taryn Grome, editor of Pharma Voice. Taryn, take it away.
Dan, thanks so much. You know, I'm so excited to kick off our 24-hour marathon with this exciting panel, as you said. We have such an esteemed group of thought leaders with us tonight, this morning, this afternoon. Thank you to all of you from around the globe for being with us. You know, as Amir noted at the beginning here, a relationship based on trust, strategic thinking, and flexibility between sponsors and their partners is more critical than ever. This is especially true for small to mid-sized sponsor companies, which are becoming increasingly important as drivers of innovation in drug development. These companies often require an outsourcing partner to assist in clinical development to manage their product out of the lab and through clinical development quickly and cost effectively. During our discussion today, we're going to cover the keys to successful sponsor-provider relationships, best practices to meet the opportunities ahead as companies scale, how the adoption of new technologies in clinical trials has changed outsourcing needs for small to mid-sized companies, and some key takeaways on how to build successful long-term outsourcing partnerships. So let's get started. I'm sure everyone on the panel has been involved in partner relationships that just haven't gelled. Amir, why don't you start us off with what you believe are the keys to a successful sponsor-provider relationship? And as the clinical trial landscape evolves, how are these strategic relationships and outsourcing approaches changing to address the specific needs of sponsors? Amir, take it away.
Okay, Taryn, I would like to take this opportunity to first thank you and Pharma Voice for this unique concept initiative. We are very lucky to kick off this marathon, and just you know, I'm well trained and I have my running shoes on for the next 24 hours.
Awesome.
I'm virtually with you. As for your question, at the end of the day, successful relationships are all about the people you establish the relationship with. For a successful and effective sponsor-provider relationship, the partner must become familiar with the sponsor culture in order to build respect and trust, which are the foundation of success and long-lasting relationship. The next important factors that we need to consider is the partner's expertise, professionalism, and quality, which are critical when jointly assessing risk and determine KPIs. Now, especially in those challenging days, the clinical trial landscape is changing. It is simply not feasible for sponsors, especially for small to mid-sized companies, to manage the operational and data management requirement alone. Advancement in technologies adoption brings with it compliance issues and improved data security. Also, complexity in trial design and operational and the need to find the right partners to address those issues are both critical success factors. And finally, as I said in the beginning, it is all about people. Nothing replaces personal connection in which all the parties act as one team, functioning and collaborating. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Amir. And I think that we're going to hear that theme of collaboration reverberate through this panel as well as through the rest of the 24 hours. We're finding that that is really one of the keys to changing our current paradigm. But Guy, I'm going to ask you to jump in next. So, what are some of the keys that you have found about developing those successful relationships?
Sure. Thank you very much for the question, and thank you to Pharma Voice for hosting this amazing event. I think some of the important traits for a successful relationship on our end from the sponsor is interestingly the same thing we hear from Amir, which is making sure there's open communication, trust, flexibility, having an honest relationship that puts the interests of patients first. I think if CROs and sponsors can align around that common goal, then execution becomes easier, especially when it may involve doing things differently or doing things the way that people haven't done traditionally in the business. And I'll give an example from our own experience. So RedHill is starting to, we're starting a phase 3 study in an indication called non-tuberculous mycobacterium lung disease. It's a serious bacterial infection that can cause lung damage, and there's no approved first-line drugs for this disease. So we could potentially be the first. That means there's a high unmet medical need, and there's also not a lot of clinical experience, both with sponsors and with CROs. The result is we've had a lot of incoming interest from SMOs. Those are site management organizations wanting to collaborate and having their sites involved. And for those of you who are not familiar with SMOs, they're organizations that work at clinical sites to help them manage all sorts of functions such as recruitment, completing CRFs, et cetera, et cetera. So having the CMOs reach out to us to matchmake with good sites is very important since we're working on a relatively rare and new indication. And our CRO in the study has taken the initiative on their own to collaborate with these SMOs, and understanding these exciting and unique, the unique potential of the study requires flexibility in doing things a little bit differently. In other words, not managing all these functions in-house, but working collaboratively with the SMO. I think this is a great example of both sides being open around the need to do this, being flexible, being honest about how to get things done, and how do you manage these new working arrangements and aligning around this common goal of getting these patients into the study, even if it requires doing things differently. So now we've just received clearance from FDA to begin our phase 3 study. So these values that Amir mentioned and that I mentioned, I think are even more important in this case, in this clinical study. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Guy, and congratulations on the FDA go ahead. That's got to be exciting times for you all there.
Thank you, yes.
That's awesome. Kanchan, I'm going to turn to you next. I know that through your career and through your function, you have a lot of different touch points with different partners inside the company as well as outside the company. So give us a little bit about your perspective.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Taryn. And I'd like to begin by saying that I've taken the liberty of expanding this panel to more than all of us over here, because I did consult with some of my peers and colleagues, like the head of clinical operations, who successfully partnered with CRO organizations, and our chief medical officer, head of biostats, to get their insights. So it's not one of me, but 5 of me giving you insights today. And, with that, I'd like, I think it's a very common theme, I think started by Amir and then followed by Guy. I think there are lots of similarities with our approach. From the sponsor's perspective, I think the key success factors, there are 3 things I'd like to share. And again, so it's very consistent with what the other panelists have just mentioned. It's, finding the right model to work with, finding the right partner, and then making it work. And I think finding the right model, there are different models where you can partner with clinical, research organizations, but finding that right model. And even at Alchemies, we've gone from a, preferred provider collaborative relationship to more of a strategic partnership with risk sharing agreements that, both parties are equally invested in all that's going on. And then finding the right provider was the second thing that I mentioned. It's more like, you have to approach this collaboration with the, longevity in mind. It's more of, it's not the dating mindset. It's more like more of a marriage mindset. Like, it's more taking it that long-term relationship that you're looking to build. And so that's why it's like finding the right partner, and then it goes to making it work, from a sponsor's perspective, especially mid-size and smaller size companies, which we have so many of today. We are always nervous that we're always going to get the B team. The A teams are reserved for the much bigger companies, but, it's up to us to ensure that every team that we work with is the best. And, how we build that collaboration, we can turn the B team into the A team. And so just making it work is very, very important. And, at Alchemies, we've really taken a patient-focused approach to drug development, integrate the patient voice into, all of our clinical trials. And we've only been able to successfully do that by partnering with patient organizations, but also the strategic collaborations with our CRO providers and vendors. And we could not do that without the great collaborations that we've built.
Excellent. And, you all have demonstrated the fact that one party can't work without the other party. So it really does need to be a trusted partnership. It needs to be collaborative. There needs to be transparency for sure. And as Guy, as you're forging new grounds, you really have to have that somebody beside you and have your back as you look to break new ground with some of these therapies. So it's so important to have that convening of minds together. And as they say, the old TV show, the A-team, you love it when a plan comes together, right? So when all those things come together, that's when it really works. So awesome. Let's move on to the second part of our discussion here tonight. And that's around, oh, I'm sorry. I forgot we have a poll. Dan, can you kick off our first poll for us? Let's get the audience involved.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. All right, the first of 2 polling questions. We'd like to know, how many clinical trial outsourcing partners or vendors do you work with? None, 1, 2, or 3 or more? And we'll give everyone a little time to give us their answer, and then we'll share the results with everybody. Okay, let's say last call, close the poll, and share the results. All right, so more than half aren't working with a vendor right now, and 40% are working with 3 or more. So it's a very polarized group. Taryn, any any comments on that?
That's it's funny to me. It's well, you're either like, it's feast or famine, right? So I would love to understand those folks who are not working with a partner, how they're doing it, and I'd love to know from those folks who are working with 3 or more how they're doing that, because either way there is inherent complexity in either one of those models. So as Kanchan said earlier, it's finding that right model for success. So interesting results. Thanks, Dan.
It's about time to start for the non.
So, you know, as we move into the next section here, and we're really going to talk about some best practices to meet the opportunities ahead as companies scale to grow. You know, Guy had just talked about getting the FDA approval to move forward with their new therapeutic. So, you know, I think that's a good place for us to start off this part of the discussion. So what are some of those best practices that you're employing, Guy, to meet the new opportunities as they rise up in front of you?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, at RedHill, we've scaled up significantly in the past recent period, both on the R&D side, where we have several clinical trials running at the same time, and also on the commercial side, where we've in the past few years built up a significant commercial operations to commercialize 3 FDA-approved products. So we've undergone a huge transformation culturally, operationally, et cetera, as a company, and how we manage these relationships really is something that we focused on and thought about. And one thing that comes to mind is trying, what we've tried to do as we scale is try to keep the culture that we've built and that we like, of being kind of fast, non-bureaucratic, efficient, you know, that kind of mentality. And I think a best practice is to find a CRO that matches your culture. So in our case, it's finding a CRO that sprints with us forward and not getting stuck. You know, in our perspective, it is sort of an administrative back and forth, which can cause delays. Some companies, some sponsors may like to do things more slowly, and, you know, they would say thoughtfully, or you know, everyone has their adjectives to describe their approach. Our approach is sort of fast and efficient. So, you know, in our case, you know, we have, and I'll give an example. So we have a very important drug in our portfolio called opaganib that we're developing for COVID-19 as a therapeutic for severe patients. We've already launched both a US phase 2 study and a global phase 2/3 study for patients who are hospitalized with COVID-19 infection. This is, of course, very high profile. It's time sensitive. And while we're pretty much at the forefront of this development, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of companies doing COVID studies. So there's a lot of competition out there. And it's also an infection, as we all know, which comes in waves. So as you're trying to do a study, you can pinpoint a location where there are patients, and all of a sudden the wave goes down and waves goes up somewhere else, kind of a whack-a-mole. So it's a very tricky place to do studies. So with our phase 2 study, it was important for us to get a CRO that could help us drive the study quickly and efficiently in this complex environment that we're in. And we found a CRO that has done a couple things, both with the sites and with the sponsor, that we think has been able to do this well. So with the sites, our CRO has had a COVID task force that they put together, dedicated to bringing up sites online very quickly. So they get IRB, Institutional Review Board approvals, and contracts approved in a very short period of time. They have a team dedicated doing just that for COVID studies. And then with the sponsor, they work very flexibly with the sponsor for contracting. So for example, instead of demanding to negotiate a full contract up front before they start work, they've allowed us to work with small work orders to get some of those initial tasks underway. So we're essentially doing the contract work and engaging and going full force in parallel. So this quickness and this flexibility has really allowed us to get these studies going quickly in a complex environment. And in fact, in our phase 2 study, we're over 50% recruitment with results expected in Q4. So it really puts us ahead of the pack in terms of other COVID-19 drugs in development. So this has huge significance to us at RedHill. Thank you.
And huge significance to you at RedHill, and huge significance to everybody who's looking for some kind of action against COVID. So you are thoughtfully sprinting, if I can say that.
There we go. Best of both worlds.
Exactly, exactly. So, you know, Kanchan, I know with you and your 5 other folks that are sitting with you around your desk who are invisible to the rest of us, talk to me about some of the best practices that your organization is using, and how you are working with some partners.
Yes, no, thank you. I think the best practices, again, you know, the 3 that, you know, we sort of really stress on. And if there were one, I would just say 3 times: communication, communication, communication. You know, that's the first one that is so important. You know, communication between the team leaders, communication between the team members, and the bi-directional feedback is so critical to the success. And, you know, and getting into the mindset of, like, you know, how are we going to make it work without always having this, you know, escalation process. I think that takes me to the next best practice, which is putting in place a good governance structure. You know, what is that overarching governance between the management that regularly meets with the team members and ensures and tracks the progress, and also identifies issues earlier on, and works with the team to, you know, put some mitigation strategies in place to address issues earlier on. And it always helps, you know, when you have these joint steering committees and joint working groups and have those regular interactions. I've seen that work very, very successfully. And the last one is processes. I know, you know, people shy away from that, but I think it's really very, very important that, you know, the processes are different between the CRO and the sponsor, and how do we come together and adapt to each other's processes? How do we learn from each other? How do we, you know, remain compliant by, you know, exchanging the processes, and then defining processes that will contribute to our success is very, very important. You know, the smaller companies, again, going back to, you know, we have the ability to accelerate processes and timelines, and you know, at mid-sized companies, we make decisions very fast, and we can be innovative, we can move really quickly. But what is difficult for us, and sometimes, you know, that comes in our way, is we have a much lower level of risk tolerance. You know, when it comes to financial and legal risks, we can't take that many, because we don't have the luxury to do that. And that may sometimes prevent us from moving as fast as we would like to be and come in the way of innovation. But I think the 3 best practices are communication, governance, and processes.
Excellent. You know, it sounds to me that without the processes, the whole thing falls apart. You have dogs and cats living together. It's mass hysteria, and nobody knows what's going on anywhere as part of the agreement. And, you know, you touched on something that was really, I thought, striking, is that it's got to be about the communication. So if you aren't communicating, then the partner can't know what your needs are, because they're not clairvoyant. And if they're not telling you, you're not clairvoyant. So you have to be able to have that open conversation. And that only happens when you have a trusted partner, where you can tell the good stuff too, as well as the bad stuff too, right?
Absolutely.
Amir, yeah, I see you shaking your head, Amir. I'm gonna let you jump in.
Excellent approach. Thank you for the interesting talk. So from my perspective, as a service provider and with a lot of experience, the bundled services are no longer the best match for most sponsors, especially when it comes to small to mid-sized companies. And I will try to emphasize a few aspects on that. For example, our business, which is focused on data services for clinical trials, require deep business domain expertise. When partnering with service providers, sponsors must ensure that ownership of the data remains theirs. Data is a company's most valuable asset, and it's a major risk to completely leave it in someone else's hands. Sponsors are so varied, and we have tons of experience for the last 10 years in what they have in-house. So what they are often looking for is a more boutique approach with individual services and less a traditional full service model, with its associated high costs that could hurt the flexibility to scale. There is no one-size-fits-all approach to good provider-client relationship. The qualities of an optimal relationship may be very different for a large pharma and small to mid-sized companies, and we heard it now. The bottom line is to become a preferred partner. To achieve that, it is critical to understand the unique needs of each client and structure the relationship to support those needs in order to support future changes and scale up. This is a daily work. That's what we are doing all the time in order to maintain the best practice and to maintain a great relationship with our customers.
Excellent, thank you. That was a great way to round us out before we go into our next poll. Dan, you're up.
Here we go. Okay, so what we'd like to know is when it comes to selecting outsourcing partners for clinical studies, what criteria do you prioritize? And we're going to let you pick more than one on this one, but hopefully you don't pick all four. Pick one or two of the most important criteria, and we'll see what we come up with here. All right, they're coming in now. Interesting. Give everyone one more moment here. There's still a few votes coming in.
Do you have the insider scoop so you know what's interesting before we do?
I'll share it in just a second. All right, last call, everybody. And let's close the poll and share the results. Well, experience is the big winner, but technical capabilities and competence a strong second. Yes? Any comments?
So, Amir, you want to comment on that poll results?
Yeah, as I said before, it's all about that you need the experience, you need to help your partner to go all the way. It's a long journey, and I know, for example, the journey of RedHill, that it's amazing from a small, tiny startup. What a great way they did, and I wish a great luck with the COVID-19. Bring us some hope.
Thank you. You know, the poll is interesting because cost isn't number one. And I think that's important that's brought out. You know, when you have something as important as a clinical study for a major product, you know, you're not trying to save, you're not trying to be the, you know, save a little bit of money. You're trying to get the study done and be penny wise, pound foolish. So I think the poll reflects that, and I think that's an important result here. Thanks, Amir. We're across.
Guy, I couldn't agree with you more. And I mean, I am also encouraged by the fact that company size and geographic reach aren't a critical factor anymore either, since we are now global and reach is now accessible wherever we go. But I think it's interesting that, you know, technical capabilities and competence came in second, and that's a great segue into our next chapter of our discussion, which is about technology. And we can't have a conversation about scalability without talking about the role of technology. So my question for the panel is, how has the adoption of new technologies, and I use that new and bunny quotes because what's new now was, you know, just new yesterday. It's new is always evolving. How have those new technology and clinical trials changed? And in turn, has this impacted the sponsor-provider relationships? Amir, I'm going to let you kick this part off since you are the data master. So talk to us about technology.
Thank you. So I will start with a statement. I think that technology and people behind the technology go hand in hand. So having said that, while there are many options, it is critical that sponsors and their partners select the technologies that are right for them based on clear evaluation of potential risk that lie ahead. And I saw that the cost is not more the main issue. So only 35% of the people answer on that. So I'm happy that this is an argument because sometimes price pressure the decision. So choosing technologies that are widely used throughout the industry provide the flexibility to better address partnership issues. The most important expense in a clinical trial is time. Selecting the technology that will scale with you as needed save much needed time in the long run. So we spoke about COVID-19 that forced the industry into changes that have been in discussion for years, like the conversation about virtual trials. Today, the only way to keep a trial going or start a new one is to move to some sort of hybrid model via technology that enables a few important factors. The first one, data capture through electronic means, such as electronic consent, eSource, eCOA, ePro, IRT, CTMS, and others. The second one, the use of data and analytics to better understand the evolving situation is critical. And of course, the future use of synthetic control arms, which are computerized simulation control arms that are derived from clinical data from previous trials, help reduce patient enrollment needs. So the future is almost here.
Almost, we're right there, right? You know, and I think the future is getting closer and closer every day. You know, we keep hearing reports out that decentralized clinical trials, remote clinical monitoring, all of these things are happening, and they're happening much faster now because of a result of COVID. And it goes back to my opening statement, we're on the verge of something extraordinary to really change the paradigm of how clinical trials and patients can be treated through the drug development process. So it's exciting. It's exciting and a little bit scary at the same time, but I think everybody's ready to embrace what's next. Kanchan, I know that you and your team work cross-functionally across the organization to enhance the collaboration, as you said earlier, and the communication, and foster dialogue that amplifies Alkermes' scientific expertise. You're helping to ensure that medicines that are designed, you develop medicines to really make a meaningful difference. How are you all using technologies to further and advance your mission?
Yeah. So we use a variety of tools and software platforms for internal communications also, which sort of, increase our, collaboration. But also for timely review of materials, we use data visualization software to report and identify trends, and also generate insights to inform our future decisions. With regards to clinical trial execution, what separates good practice from best practice is the company's willingness to listen to the needs of their investigators and the patients, and then to adapt quickly to those needs. The pandemic has had a chilling effect on, what the traditional approaches, as Amir just mentioned, to clinical trial recruitment and conduct. But at the same time, this crisis has been a tremendous driver for the implementation of newer technologies and flexible approaches that we've had to adapt to very quickly. So the silver lining to the whole situation we are all in right now is that it has accelerated the need to adapt to newer technologies at lightning speed. And so companies need to identify, I think there are three things we need to look at, which is strategies, technologies, and then the right partners to improve the speed and quality of the research while we are maintaining, it in a cost-effective way, and to improve clinical trial participation. We've spoken a lot about virtual trials, but also where I sit in medical affairs, for health economics and outcomes research also, there's a lot of real world data generation, looking at the healthcare claims and platforms to look at electronic medical records and, integrations, including, as Amir mentioned, digital monitoring and digital biomarkers as well. Those are getting, increasingly important. So, the other aspect also of technology, it's huge in helping maintain the clinical trial database. By implementing the right software, you can identify errors earlier on, and you can, then improve on your data collection techniques along the way. Amir mentioned the enrollment part, which I think is critical. You're reducing the burden of your internal resources to go and monitor enrollment at the sites, because you can do it real time by just checking what updates have been made. So, technological advances have contributed to the successful execution of the clinical trials, and we're seeing that it's becoming increasingly important in this environment. One other important aspect to consider for effective clinical trial execution is related to the buzzword in our industry of patient centricity. I spoke earlier about the patient voice in our clinical trial by, again, partnering with our clinical research organizations, our other vendors, with patient-focused collaborations, taking that approach, partnering with patient advocacy groups and professional medical societies. From where I sit, have seen that collaboration be super, super successful. These organizations can educate the patients on the investigational compounds, encourage them to participate in the clinical trials. They can educate the investigators. Another way, and this has been done in many therapeutic areas in the past, and I think more in oncology and HIV, but very sort of, not that much practiced in the therapeutic areas like neuroscience. The other collaborations between patient advocacy organizations and professional medical societies, and the technology that we can implement in collaboration with CRO providers, is doing meta-analysis of data sets, to talk about a class of compounds, working with patient registry data sets as well to, enhance and complement our clinical trial data sets as well. And so I'd just like to say this whole collaboration that we have with our CRO providers, with patient-focused organizations, and the technological advances together have given us the ability to generate unique data sets to enhance and complement our clinical trial data. So it's a very exciting time in some ways for us.
I agree with you, and what you're saying goes back to what Amir said before too. It's about the people and the personal connection and understanding what is necessary from the patient's point of view, as well as from each of the provider and the partner side too. Guy, I'm going to turn it over to you as a specialty biopharmaceutical company. Excuse me. How is RedHill adapting clinical technologies?
Well, we look forward to the day of what Amir was talking about with control arms of the future, right. And that's very exciting for us. we're in I think a very practical thing is very, very important, which is compliance and making sure that that's done well. When you're doing a clinical study, a few patients being compliant or not compliant can wreak statistical havoc on your study or lead to great success. And an example from our perspective is we recently have Talicia approved for H. pylori infection. And this is a new drug for H. pylori infection. There's been no new drug approved for the last decade. So there were very few CROs or sponsors with disease-specific experience. And also when you were building the statistical plan, it was a little bit tricky because you have to model a bunch of things where you just don't have a good database or experience to sort of predict how things will go. We were able to get the study, however, recruited and done on time. And when FDA reviewed the study, there was no specific clinical issues that they had issues with. So how were we able to do that? I think one of the critical parts of having that study be successful was technology, specifically getting, and this is very mundane, but having very good dosing diaries that allowed investigators to monitor and stay in contact with patients, to follow up with them, make sure they're being compliant. And those little things really made a huge, huge difference. If we were living in a world before that was available, it would have looked like a very different study. We're also, with our NTM study that I mentioned earlier, this is another one where there have been no new drugs approved. There have been no drugs approved first line. And as a result, again, not a lot of experience with CROs or with clinical studies. So making sure that our compliance applications are phone apps that collect quality of life data, making sure that that is working well and meeting our targets is very, very critical. And then the last example, and this is as future looking as we'll go as the sponsors, is with our COVID study. It's a challenge in this COVID environment to do studies when sites are locked down or inaccessible to non-critical staff, and especially in studies where you're actually studying COVID. So one of the things we're evaluating is remote monitoring, data collections such as uploading source documents, things that sort of minimize the need to have a person-to-person contact. So these are the different ways we're both using technology to make our studies more reliable and compliant, and also kind of peeking into the future about ways to make it more virtual and easier for the sponsor and also for the sites.
That's awesome. And I think that is a peek into the future. And I think you also gave us another peek into the future when we talk about the synthetic control arms. I'd like to explore that a little bit more too, because that's a comment that we received in from our chat room. And that this could be the potential real future game changer for the industry. Thoughts, and I'll just open it up. So raise your hand if you want to comment on that.
So I think that it can start with how you treat the data, because in the end of the day, you know that in December 16, the FDA adopt, become mandatory to submit all your data under CDISC standard. So CDISC is a standardization that you need to convert all your data for one single database. And this is, I think, will be the gate for this opportunity for synthetic arm, that you can compare the data, you can put everything under one big data, and then you can dig in those, in the control arm, and use those data that you already have in your servers to design the study differently and do it much better.
Fantastic.
So we are there. I think that we will start the journey and it will be there. And I think that also COVID-19 crisis expedites a lot of things that we talked about. Yeah. So we see that everything is happening now. So it's an amazing, on this note, I think that it's an opportunity to generate a lot of initiatives and a lot of things that we plan and talked about. So.
Right, a silver lining out of all of this, absolutely. Guy, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think the control arm innovation would be huge from our perspective. I mean, one of the classic problems of recruiting an advanced study is you know, a patient having to make that assessment if I could go into a placebo arm, and that's not something that's a negative for people often when they're considering going into a study. So having an ability to manage that or find solutions for that, I think will really enable more effective recruitment strategies, which is a huge issue and a great innovation. The other thing it might do is allow sponsors to maybe even have a study or a drug developed at more advanced, like a first line instead of second line, because it changes the nature of how you're testing and what you're testing. Sometimes what FDA wants from a scientific perspective can be challenging from a practical perspective as a sponsor, as a site, or as a patient. And I think this might help bridge that gap, which will really be great for clinical studies.
Kanchan, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'd like to add that, you know, I know I mentioned patient registries, and, you know, some organizations collect that data and over a longer time. And, you know, the experience I've had has been very successful, that if you take that patient registry data and, you know, apply sophisticated methodologies like propensity score matching and the like to your clinical trial data set, you know, it doesn't meet the standards of FDA or any regulatory agency, but it absolutely will support you for reimbursement, which is also really huge. I think regulatory approval of a product is the first thing you need to get, but then after that, the global reimbursement can be quite challenging in some parts of the world. And that's why generating these longer term data by using any control data sets from previously done trials or from patient registries can be very, very helppful to have successful discussions with payer authorities and reimbursement authorities.
Excellent. And a shout out to Joe Dustin for bringing that to our attention. Thank you, Joe, out there. So one of the other questions I want to ask in terms of technology is, what pressure does that put on some of your teams as we go and then we start adopting technology more quickly and more technologies? Does it put additional pressure on any of your internal teams that they just may not be ready for at this point? I'll turn to you, Kanchan, first. I know this is a question coming at you from no prep, but
no, it's a great question, and it's a welcome change, but it can be challenging for some. As you've highlighted, there's a training component with every new technology that you introduce, and some take to it faster than others. And I think sometimes it's better to have a dedicated group who may have some experience with technology to sort of, you know, spearhead the change that you want to do, rather than just give it to people who are not very savvy with adapting or adopting to these new methodologies. But yes, there are internal challenges that we need to think about, but if sort of planned appropriately, I think they could be successfully addressed. And the benefit of having the new technology, as you know, Amir and Guy have also said, is huge right now in the current environment. And it's been something that industry has been thinking about for a while, but right now we have no choice. We just have to, you know, adapt to it. So it's a good time to train people during this environment as well.
Excellent. And that's where your trusted provider partner comes in, because they can help you bridge, right? So Amir, how are you helping some of your clients with some of their technology issues that really, because it's all coming at them fast and furious?
I think this is our role. In the end of the day, like the mindset of training and looking behind and raising the bar, as you start at the beginning, it's all about that. We need to be to take the lead and help our customer, the sponsors, to take the next step, to integrate new approach, to integrate between software and technologies. And this is something that, you know, we have a department for training and for taking the next steps and understanding what is the next buzzword and what is the next thing that the regulatory agencies want and how we can achieve that. So it's something that we are not afraid from that. It's part of our communication, and it's part of our role in the industry. So and we see now in the last 6 months, that's amazing how many changes we face, how many changes we need to adopt. And you know, it's amazing to see that the people, the employees, the partners, our customers goes together hands in hand. So it's all about what we said before.
Excellent. And Guy, you are not afraid of change because you keep breaking new ground with every drug you all bring out. So how are you managing all of this at the same time?
Well, I think one thing we do is if there's so much innovation and so much change happening in technology, we don't try to have everyone in the company or on the team updated about everything. So that the people who are managing a specific function, they need to know everything and be updated. But the folks who may be involved or related to the clinical study who are not dealing with that aspect of the technology don't necessarily be. And that way we make sure people are sprinting forward, but they're not held back by some of the folks who are less technologically savvy or in the know. So we try to find a balance of, you know, being flexible, having the right people know the right things, and then everyone else, if you have questions or something becomes relevant to that team member, they kind of get integrated. So kind of is this amoeba moving forward, you know, at different rates at different places, but all together, but a fast moving amoeba.
I love it. Go ahead, Kanchan.
Yeah, no, I know we're running out of time, but there were 2 questions from the audience for Guy. So I don't know, would you like me to just bring it up, Sharon?
I was going to ask, we're going to get to the Q&A just right now. So if you just give me a second, I was going to, you know, in our spirit of raising the bar, I was going to ask you all to do a quick lightning round in terms of how you are raising the bar. And Kanchan, I'm going to start with you. So tell me about how you're raising the bar, and then we will get to those questions.
Yes, no, thank you so much. I think my way of raising the bar is by transforming and challenging myself and my team. I constantly try to give them new opportunities, stretch opportunities, and like to give them the freedom to, you know, execute with all the support that they need to be successful. I constantly tell them that, never be satisfied with what you do. There's always room for improvement. And as my spiritual mentor always taught me, is do your duty and a little more. So I always like to do that little bit more and be successful. And I think by constantly challenging myself and transforming myself, you know, how we raise the bar is by connecting people and hopefully improving lives and reimagining science.
Excellent. And you do a little bit more. You brought in 5 other people to be with you for this panel. So that's doing a little bit more. Guy, we'll go to you and then we'll round it out with Amir.
Sure, thanks. I keep coming back to the pandemic and how this has affected everyone, because it's been such a crazy and unusual situation. It's hit everyone hard. The way I think that we've done this is where everyone, when this happened, everyone's mode of thinking was sort of shutdown mode or withdrawal, or how do I, you know, reduce and get into this kind of bunker mentality. And we kind of went in the opposite direction. We kind of stepped up and we said, well, what do we have that can contribute? And we worked around the clock with our CRO partners, our manufacturers, regulatory authorities to get our drug available. Well, first on a compassionate use basis to patients, and then eventually with our 2 clinical studies and hospitalized patients And recently we've just completed in vitro studies that were done under challenging situations. So we've kind of tried to step up to the situation, and hopefully we're successful, we'll see, but really kind of use what we have as a company to address this unmet medical need and hopefully make a difference for humanity.
Awesome. And we're going to be watching you on your COVID study for sure. Amir, take us home for raising the bar.
Guy, we trust you. Brilliant solution. So I believe that raising the bar is a mindset and a long-term commitment. We at Bioforum, and of course me personally, will remain committed to influencing and leading the best practices in our industry through involvement and promotion of our industry working groups. We will continue making leading technologies and regulatory guidance accessible for small to medium-sized companies who are in desperate need for a good piece of advice. Finally, we will never stop investing in relationship and partnership, which I believe is the best way to achieve everyone's ultimate goal of improving the life of patients in need. And of course, it all begins with growing and developing our employees in-house, which directly influence the organization's stability, as well its ability to continuously raise the bar. And Taryn, thank you so much for this great opportunity and for raising the bar by connecting us all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We truly can't do it without you. You are why we are. So thank you. I'm going to turn to our Q&A. We do have a couple of questions here. So Guy, this question is for you. You mentioned the usefulness of SMO at the beginning. Do you anticipate any changes in the roles of and expectations to SMOs in the new clinical trial settings involving technology?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not an expert on SMO, so I'll start off with that. I think that from what I have discussed it with our clinical trials team, and for what I understand, they played a significant role, and then historically, and then came down quite a bit, kind of came off of the radar screen for some time, and now are making somewhat of a comeback. So you see them involved a little bit more. I think as with the competitiveness of recruitment of patients, with the complexity of site management and some of the technologies we've discussed, I do think they will be playing a bigger role. I can't predict what big of a role, but I do think that we're seeing a comeback, and it's for a reason.
Excellent. And the next question also can apply to you, as well as maybe Amir and Kanchan. So as the CRO and the CMO handle site feasibility questionnaires, what are some of your questions that enable you to see the best site recruitment results? What are some of your best practices there?
For us, it's tricky. I mean, it comes first with site selection, and you ask questions, and everyone is very optimistic, and then and then you start the study, and sometimes the expectations are different. So I think first you have to be aware of that going in. As a sponsor, we see fewer studies than CROs. So we're kind of the, my answers may sound a little bit maybe naive or simple to the CROs doing this all the time, but that's our vantage point. But we see fewer studies. So for us, having that expectation right up front that you have to take those questionnaires and on site selection, carefully, thoughtfully ask the right question, try to see the experience of those sites with clinical studies as much as you can, and try to get a realistic assessment. And then also being flexible and willing to adopt. So if you see sites not recruiting at the level that you thought or they thought, working with them on the one hand, but also looking for new sites and being able to move. So having your plan A, your plan B, and having everything moving in real time so you can adapt as soon as you start getting those numbers in, and you're starting to say, oh, this site isn't doing well, what's going on there? Let's reach out to that site, find out, what's the issue? Is there something with the patient population they're seeing? Is there something with personnel issues? What it is, troubleshooting, working real time, fast and flexible to try to address those issues as soon as they're coming up, and not sort of going on autopilot and seeing what the recruitment pipeline brings your way.
Excellent. We have time for one more question, and as our attendee Heather says, it's a tough question, but her question is, what's the one thing that doesn't currently exist or work well in the management of data and solutions in clinical trials that sponsors would love to have available? So she said it was tough.
The magic touch of recruitment.
What was that, Amir?
The magic touch, or God interfere with the recruitment. So it's all about recruitment, the time that we mentioned before. So it's all about that. We can be ready with the system, we can be ready with the setup, everything can be okay, but where is the patient? So this is, I think, the unsolved issue yet, even though there are so many ways to recruit and so many ways to integrate between systems, but again, this is the one, the link that will change the environment if we can recruit much faster, according to the expected timelines. So,
right,
this is a real challenge. Yes.
Agreed. Kanchan, any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with Amir that if we're not enrolling, then there's nothing left to the study at all. And so, that's the most critical part. And the other part is like, communication around the results. And so the data cleaning and the data transfer and the way that's done and packaged is so critical. And sometimes, if that can be worked out earlier on and there are better ways of doing it, I think that should be worked on. But that's also critical, is reporting out on the trials sometimes in a timely way, and sometimes in some therapeutic areas it's in an ongoing way that you need to do that. So that also, and if any of the panelists would like to comment on that would be great as well. Yeah.
So we have about 1 minute left. So Amir, do you have a final thought?
Yeah, I think it's, if we can wrap up everything, so it goes with recruitment, and then how we wrap all the technology and your data and convert it on the right time and submit it to the regulatory agencies. So I think that it was a great panel, and thank you for this opportunity, and an excellent kickoff for the next 23 hours.
Thank you. I'm excited. I thought it was an excellent kickoff to our next 23 hours as well. We can't thank you enough. And you started off, this is all about the people. And I can't thank you, my people, for being here with us tonight. Kanchan, here it is, midnight, 1 o'clock a.m. on the East Coast, coming to us from Israel in the middle of the afternoon, to our folks coming in from Australia, from Boston, from California, Maine, how could I forget you, India, China. Thank you all for being part of this.
For more Pharma Voice 100 content, visit www.pharmavoice100.com.